The USA Patriot Act, commonly known as the Patriot Act, um, was enacted following the September 11th attacks with the stated goal of dramatically tightening U.S. national security, particularly as it related to foreign terrorism. In general, the act included three main provisions, which were one, expanded abilities of law enforcement to surveil, including by tapping domestic and international phones; two, eased interagency communication to allow federal agencies to more effectively use all available resources in counterterrorism efforts; and three, increased penalties for terrorism crimes and an expanded list of activities which could qualify someone to be charged with terrorism. A little bit about the history of the Patriot Act, which was enacted in direct response to the September 11th attacks. On October 23rd, 2001, U.S. Representative Jim Stassenbrenner, Republican out of Wisconsin, introduced a bill, H.R. 3162, which incorporated provisions from a previously sponsored House bill and a Senate bill introduced earlier in the month. And on the next day, October 24th, the act passed the House by a vote of 357 to 66, with Democrats comprising the overwhelming majority of no votes, and the three Republicans voting no were Robert Ney of Ohio, Butch Otter of Idaho, and Ron Paul of Texas. Opponents of the law have criticized its provisions for indefinite detention of immigrants, permission to law enforcement to search a home or business without the owner's or the occupant's consent or knowledge under certain circumstances, and the expanded use of national security letters, which allow the Federal Bureau of Investigation to search telephone, email, financial records without a court order, and the expanded access of law enforcement agencies to business records, including library and financial records. Since its passage, several court challenges have been brought against the act, and federal courts have ruled that a number of provisions are unconstitutional, which is the reason why it passed by an overwhelming majority from both the Republican and Democrats. The bill, which removed most of the changes from the Senate version, passed Congress on March 2nd, 2006, and was signed by President Bush on March 9th and 10th of that year. However, on May 11, 2012, President Barack Obama signed the Patriot Sunsets Extension Act of 2011, which was a 4-year extension of three key provisions in the act, which were roving wiretap searches of business records and conducting surveillance of lone wolves, which are determined as individuals suspected of terrorist-related activities not linked to terrorist groups. After reauthorization bills failed to pass Congress, parts of the Patriot Act expired on June 1st, 2015. However, the USA Freedom Act, which became a law on June 2nd, 2015, reenacted these expired sections through 2019. However, Section 215 of the law was amended to disallow the National Security Agency, the NSA, to continue its mass phone data collection program. Instead, phone companies will retain the data, and the NSA can obtain information about targeted individuals with a federal search warrant. However, all that doesn't matter because the NSA stored your data, every single American's data, between the years 2003 to 2015. 2019 at the Utah Data Center in Pine Bluff, Utah. There were 10 titles attributed to the Patriot Act. Title 1, Enhancing Domestic Security Against Terrorism. Title 2, Enhanced Surveillance Procedures. Title 3, Anti-Money Laundering to Prevent Terrorism. Title 4, Border Security. Title 5, Removing Obstacles to Investigating Terrorism. Title 6, Victims and Families of Victims of Terrorism. Title 7, Increased Information Sharing for Critical Infrastructure Protection. Title 8, Terrorism Criminal Law. Title 9, Improved Intelligence. And Title 10, Miscellaneous. A number of controversies arisen out of the act, which was to be expected. Opponents of the act have been quite vocal in asserting that it was passed opportunistically after the September 11th attacks, believing that there could have been little debate about it. They view the act as one that was hurried through the Senate with little change before it was passed by Senators Patrick Leahy and Russ Feingold, which proposed amendments to modify the final revision. The ACLU, in a new fact sheet, challenged the Department of Justice website, wants you to believe that the act threatens our most basic civil liberties. Ashcroft and his roadies called the changes in law modest and incremental, since almost nobody has read the legislation. Much of what we know about it comes from third hand and, of course, the media. One prime example of how the Patriot Act has stirred controversy is the case of Susan Lindauer. Lindauer was a former congressional staffer and anti-war activist who was charged under the Patriot Act with, quote, acting as an unregistered agent of a foreign government, end quote, which then ruled by a court, which she was ruled by a court mentally unfit and to stand trial. Lindauer has emphatically denied both on so many occasions, saying that she, in fact, had been a CIA agent serving as a link between the U.S. and Iraqi governments. In 2010, she wrote a book called Extreme Prejudice, The Terrifying Story of the Patriot Act and Cover-Ups of 9/11 and Iraq to that effect. Charges were dropped in 2009. Another example of controversy in the Patriot Act is the 2012 case, United States versus Antoine Jones, a nightclub owner who was linked to a drug trafficking stash house via a law enforcement GPS tracking device attached to his car. It was placed there without a warrant, which caused a serious conviction obstacle for federal prosecutors in court. Through the years, the case rose all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the conviction was overturned. The court found that increased monitoring of suspects caused by such legislation, like the Patriot Act, violated the defendant's constitutional rights. And that's not only it. In 2004, FBI agents used this provision to search and secretly examine the home of Brandon Mayfield, who was wrongfully jailed for 2 weeks on suspicion of involvement in the Madrid train bombings. While the U.S. government did publicly apologize to Mayfield and his family, Mayfield took it further through the courts, and on September 26, 2007, Judge Ann Aiken found the law was, in fact, unconstitutional, as the search was an unreasonable imposition on Mayfield and thus violated the Fourth Amendment. Perhaps one of the biggest controversies involving the use of the national security letters by the FBI was because they allow the FBI to search telephone, email, and financial records without a court order. They were criticized by many parties, including the American Civil Liberties Union. Although FBI officials have a series of internal checks and balances that must be met before the issue of an NSL, federal judge Victor Marrero ruled that national security letters provisions unconstitutional. And in November of 2005, Business Week reported that the FBI had issued hundreds of thousands of NSLs and obtained 1 million financial credit, unemployment, and in some cases health records from the customers of targeted Las Vegas businesses. Selected businesses included casinos, storage warehouses, car rental agencies. An anonymous justice official claimed that such requests were permitted under Section 505 of the USA Patriot Act, and despite the volume of requests, insisted we are not inclined to ask courts to endorse fishing expeditions. As you can see, many problems with the bill. As of late in 2018, Brett Kavanaugh, who was the White House counsel, Patriot Act concluded that on Thursday, the Senate Judiciary Committee, which released the first production of records for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh from his time as associate counsel for George Bush, roughly 5,700 pages of documents were made available to the public. The documents show that Kavanaugh assisted in the efforts to pass the Patriot Act and drafted a statement that President Bush incorporated in the bill signing. Kavanaugh wrote that the Patriot Act will, quote, update laws authorizing government surveillance, end quote, which he claimed and President Bush then restated were from an era of rotary phones. In fact, the Patriot Act weakened numerous U.S. privacy laws, including the subscriber privacy provisions in the Cable Act and the email safeguards in the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Both laws were enacted after the era of rotary phones, in which Congress amended the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act after it revealed that the White House had authorized warrantless wiretapping of Americans beginning in 2002. In an email exchange, Kavanaugh wrote that the Patriot Act was a, quote, measured, careful, responsible, and constitutional approach, end quote. He recently submitted 2 urgent Freedom of Information Act requests for Judge Kavanaugh records during the time serving as staff secretary for President Bush. But as you can see, numerous problems. It went under 3 reauthorizations. And on February 27, 2010, Barack Obama, who was actually the strongest proponent of the Patriot Act, even more so than Bush, signed into law legislation that would temporarily extend the Act and 3 controversial provisions of the Patriot Act that had been set to expire. One, authorized court-approved roving wiretaps that permit surveillance on multiple phones. 2, allow court-approved seizure of records of property in anti-terrorism operations. 3, permit surveillance against a so-called lone wolf of non-U.S. citizens engaged in terrorism who may not be a part of a recognized terrorist group. And on May 26, 2011, Barack Obama used an auto pen, which is basically a device used for the automatic signing of a signature autograph, to sign the Patriot Act Sunsets Extension Act of 2011, a 4-year extension of 3 key provisions in the USA Patriot Act while he was in France. Republican leaders questioned if the use of the auto pen met the constitutional requirements for signing a bill into law. Was that the only thing that they were against? The Reauthorization Act also legislates increased organizational congressional oversight for emergency disclosures by communication provisions undertaken Section 212 of the Patriot Act. The duration of FISA surveillance and physical search orders were increased under the Act. Surveillance performed against lone wolf terrorists under Section 207 of the Patriot Act were increased to 120 days for initial order, while pen registers and trap and trace devices extensions under FISA were increased from 90 days to a year. In 2019, the House approved a 3-month extension of the Patriot Act, which would have expired on December 15, 2019, and it was included as part of a bigger stopgap spending bill aimed at preventing government shutdown, which was approved by a vote of 231 to 192. The vote was mostly along party lines, with Democrats voting in favor and Republicans voting against, for you bipartisan advocates. As you can see, both the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, ruled in favor of reauthorizing and extending the act. However, on March 10, 2020, Gerald Nadler, a Democrat from New York District, proposed a bill to reauthorize the Patriot Act, and it was then approved by the majority of the U.S. House of Representatives after 152 Democrats joined the GOP in supporting the extension. The surveillance powers of the Patriot Act needed renewal by March 15, 2020, and after it expired, the U.S. Senate approved an amended version of the bill. After President Trump threatened to veto the bill, hey, at least you got rid of Trump, right? The House of Representatives issued an indefinite postponement of the vote to pass the Senate version of the bill. As of December 2020, the Patriot Act remains expired, however, not indefinitely. And that's the problem. The problem belongs not with the bills and executive orders. The problem belongs with the people who believe that by advocating for Democrats and Republicans, you're going to see change that benefits you. And that is a pipe dream. And you need to wake up.